Okay, let's go. This is going to be a fascinating hour, and I'm truly honored to have this gentleman as a guest, and I hope all of you will learn, as I'm looking forward to doing, new things about very interesting subjects. Let me just leave it at that while I do the introduction here. The guest, of course, is, if you've looked at guests at Rense.com, Dr. Ken Johnston. Ken learned to fly in the U.S. Marine Corps, and in the 1960s, Ken was one of the 5 test pilots assigned to work with the astronauts during the Apollo Moon program at NASA in Houston. His job back then was to help train the astronauts to fly the lunar module. He was one of the test conductors and became the test director of the TM-5 lunar module spacecraft that was used to train all moon landing Apollo astronauts. All of them. In 1969, Ken was responsible for controlling all of the data and photographic. Let me do that again. I want to hit the word all. In 1969, Ken was responsible for controlling all of the data and photographic information generated from the lunar missions. All of the data and photographic information. Okay? Ken has 3 Bachelor's of Science degrees in aviation and aerospace engineering. He has a doctorate in divinity and a PhD in metaphysics. In 2001, NASA and JPL selected Dr. Ken Johnston to represent them in New Mexico as one of their solar system ambassadors. Ken is no longer with NASA or JPL, but continues to give lectures throughout the United States. To wrap up an amazing career, Ken has now come forward to disclose what was really found on the backside of the moon. He's retired now, raises miniature horses and donkeys in New Mexico, has a big family to have fun with, and really, I hope, is enjoying life. Another man who has served this country brilliantly. Ken, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you, sir. There was a recent story, and one of the reasons you're on, most specifically, had to do with a story that, well, you had some issues with it. Let's put it that way. It was all over the internet about the second week of September. NASA whistleblower, alien moon cities exist, and I saw the story back then, and it went on and on, round and round, and pretty fanciful things in it, but I thought I'd invite you on, and thanks to Jay Widener for setting this up. And I guess we could kind of start wherever you'd like, but I certainly do want to spend some time on the issue of your being in charge of and responsible for controlling all of the data and photographic information generated from the lunar missions. This is key information. All right, where would you like to start?
Well, I don't know. I guess we could start about in the beginning, particularly with this article where they were saying that, I came out and said that there were alien cities, et cetera. A lot of that information was published by Richard C. Hoagland and Mike Barra in their book, Dark Mission. And, it's kind of interesting how the news, if you've been following it, which we all can't help from following it,
right?
They have a tendency to kind of get a little tidbit, and then they start spinning it the way they want to see it.
Well, they grow it into a mountain, some of them. They take a little... It's amazing what they do. It's far beyond spin. I mean, they almost create an entire fiction.
That's what my eyes up. And there's so much real truth and information out there that if they just stick to the basics and do proper journalism and research things, all the public would be well informed. As far as being in charge of all of the photographic and data generated, this was at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. All of the pictures that were taken during the missions to the moon, those that also went around the moon, it didn't land Apollo 10 and, of course, Apollo 13.
Okay, we're talking, excuse me, Ken, we're talking about all the pictures taken en route to the moon, orbiting the moon, landing on the moon, leaving the moon, all of it went through your hands.
In addition, all of the photographic data that was generated at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory as the various scientists would come in from around the world and process some of the moon rocks, and then they would write up their particular reports as to what was found on the moon. And that kind of brings up an interesting story, Jeff. I was on a flight and talking with a person sitting next to me. We're talking a little bit about the Apollo program and the moon rocks, and this gentleman across the aisle. He says, could I interview you? I'm with the Arizona Herald. And the reason I bring that up is that in the conversation, we talked about some of the elements that are found in the moon rocks. We found that there was hydrogen, and we did find some oxygen. And I made the comment that if we were to set up a base, we could process that and we actually be able to create our own fuel for return flights and make it a little bit easier. Well, when the article came out, it said that Johnston said that they could land on the moon and fuel up their rockets. So,
just like pulling up to a gas pump. No problem at all.
No problem at all. No. But I helped generate the lunar sample information catalogs. Various scientists would take all of their writings, and if you know how doctors write, it's a little difficult. I had a whole typing pool of stenographers, and I would have to proofread and edit and put it into a document and create the lunar sample information catalog.
So you try to make it readable, is what you're saying.
Correct. And also would want to know where their particular rock came from on the lunar surface. So we had lunar surface pictures. We had the angles that it was, where it was cut. It was in the middle of this particular rock or on the sides. Mm-hmm. And then they would write up their particular reports on it like that. So these I would ship out all over the world with lunar samples. Now, we would have scientists who would come in, and they would want to have a picture and have a good, take a look and see what they were getting. And so that was quite an opportunity. And Dr. Jeffrey Warner had been in charge of it for the first 2 flights to the moon, and he asked me to take over from him. And I got a few commendations of cleaning up the mess and getting it to where everybody could find what they needed.
Well, you were sitting literally at the nexus of some of the most amazing information in history. I mean, that must have been very exciting for you.
It has been, and looking back over it, it's sometimes I look at it and I say, did we really do all of this stuff? But fortunately, I was a pack rat, and I kept all the documents and records and information, and actually was able, we'll get into that a little bit, on the pictures that were taken.
Right. This is going to be very important and germane to the crux of our conversation here, which is we don't get the full story from NASA, which surprises absolutely nobody listening, but they do want to hear the details. Now, I'm not going to ask you to say yes or no, but I certainly hope you got a little piece of your own moon rock out of the deal somewhere along the line. I mean, how many pieces did they bring back? How many pounds altogether over the mission histories that we know about?
Since it's been well over 40-something years ago, so little details like that I've kind of let slip. I can dig it out for you, and on the program we can talk.
Well, you're certainly welcome to come back. Sure, I was going to say it had to be several hundred pounds. Yeah.
Hundreds of pounds, yes.
Yeah. Okay, so you're in Houston.
Right.
The missions are underway. The telemetry is coming back. Photographs. Were they sending back live video to you as well?
We had both. We had live telemetry, photographic feed coming back. But primarily what I was interested in most were the Hasselblad cameras and the 16-millimeter sequence cameras.
Right.
There's quite a story behind Apollo 14 and what was discovered on the backside of the moon on the command module and the 16-millimeter sequence cameras.
Okay.
If I could go into that a little bit.
Well, let's do that. Now, the backside of the moon is never seen by us folks here on the ground. Clementine, and I've forgotten the year now, but Clementine, the U.S. naval satellite that went up and literally mapped, I guess, the entire backside of the moon, and perhaps the entire moon, if I remember correctly. But anyway, Clementine did the whole thing, supposedly. Those pictures, all of them, have never been released to the public that I'm aware of. And it is said that the backside of the moon is a very interesting place. So tell us about Apollo 14.
All right. Apollo 14, as most people may recall, when we went to the moon, we had to separate the lunar module from the command module.
Sure.
The 2 astronauts that were to go on the lunar surface would descend in the lunar module and land on the surface and do their experiments down there. While they were on the surface, the command module pilot continued to go around and around and around the moon and had various experiments he had to do, as one of which was photographing the backside of the moon. Now, there was a director of the astronomy and department at the Manned Spacecraft Center at the time. It wasn't Johnson Space Center. Was Dr. Thornton Page, and very, very interesting gentleman. He contacted me and asked if I could get a hold of a specific reel of 16 millimeter film from the Apollo 14 mission.
All right. When was this? When was this, Ken? When did he ask you, approximately?
This was the astronauts. Let's see. This was Apollo 14, so we had stopped quarantining the astronauts.
Mm-hmm.
We had to quarantine Apollo 11.
I remember.
And Apollo 12 because there was concern about bringing back any
microbes,
contaminants.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it was right within a week after we returned on Apollo 14.
Okay. Network, we're going to go right through the break. Keep going, Ken, please. All right, so it was right after that, and you got a request, again, for 16 millimeter stop action.
No, it's a 16 millimeter gun sequence camera. It's the same type of cameras that are used on the jet fighters and bombers whenever they go out and drop bombs and missions and things to show whether or not they destroy a target. So the camera itself can allow you to go frame by frame or sequence of frames. You can zoom in and zoom out.
Got it.
Since I was trained in that, Dr. Page asked me if I'd pull that. You had to have a top secret clearance to be able to get into the back of the photo laboratory at JSC. And so it was my privilege to go and pull that out and set up a private showing for Dr. Page and 7 of the other scientists, astronomers.
Now again, this is all back side of the moon. Okay.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, I set it up, and the guests were all there, and we're watching the pictures coming by, and then on this particular reel, and we're coming up on a crater which is called Tsiolkovsky. As you know, the Russians pretty well named most of the large craters on the backside of the moon. What we did. And Tsiolkovsky was very interesting. The sun angle was such that half of the crater was in shadow. The bottom of the crater was in shadow. And in that shadow area, there was a cluster of like 5 domes. So what I could describe would be like clear domes or opaque domes that were generating their own light in the shadow in this crater. And there looked like a column of steam or something coming up from the central one. Dr. Page had me freeze the camera, stop, back and forth, go back and forth, zoom in close, and go back. And he turned to the other 7 scientists and says, "Well, boys, what do you think?" And they all started chuckling and laughing like it was an inside joke. And he asked me to go ahead, okay, finish the reel. Well, I did that, and then I had to take the film back into the photo laboratory and check it back in overnight because I was due to show it the next day to the rank and file scientists and engineers at NASA's JSC. When I was going into the laboratory, this is another important point here. As I was carrying it in and I went through the secure area into the back, there was a light table.
I can, excuse me, are you on speakerphone by any chance?
No, actually, I'm on headphones and microphone with a cell phone.
Something's getting scraped or pushed against the mouthpiece of the speaker on one or the other. So try and I want to be sure we hear every word you're saying. It's a little bit of ambient noise there somewhere. Anyway, go ahead, please.
Right, I accidentally knocked off one of the headsets I had here.
Okay.
So as I'm taking the film in to the back, the canister that had the film in it, there was this light table. There were 3 people there, and there were 2 gentlemen and a young lady, and they had the negatives out, and they were painting on the negatives.
What?
And I asked them what. Yes.
Now, this hold on, please. This, first of all, this is a black and white film or color film?
Oh, both.
Okay. Now, they had the film. Was it on a reel left and a reel right? In other words, they were winding the film through some kind of a work area in the middle of the 2 reels, or did they have the film just laying on the table and were pulling the film off the reel?
Well, what they had done is they had enlargements, probably 8 by 10 inch enlargements, positive transparencies.
Yeah.
Okay. And so they were using those to become the master, and they were painting out, particularly along the horizon and areas on the lunar surface, and I asked them what they were doing, and one of the gentlemen says, "Well, we're professional strippers." The young lady, she kind of took offense to that. She said, "No, what we do is that we are stripping out, we are painting out the horizon on the moon because the stars would confuse people, and we don't want them to get confused with the little specks of light."
Oh, sure. Right.
Well, I kind of took that as strange, went on in and checked that canister of film in. And the next morning at 10 o'clock, I went and checked it back out again to give the showing at the main auditorium for, as I say, the rank and file at Johnson Center.
knowing what was to be seen, and obviously looking forward to this because it's an astonishing thing. Yeah.
I had the privilege of my older brother working there as well as my first cousin.
Mm-hmm.
Another interesting story here. But they were both present for this showing, and as we're getting close to it, I'm saying, okay, guys, you got to see what we found on the backside of the moon.
Mm-hmm.
We come up on Tsiolkovsky, and there's nothing in the shadow. There's nothing in the crater. And we go on across, and I stopped the camera, the film I'm showing, and I told the audience, I said, I'm having camera problems, just a moment. And I backed up. I took the film out. I looked to see if it had been cut or spliced, because, of course, I know how to do that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I could not find any evidence that it had been cut or spliced, which means in 24 hours, they'd taken that film, taken it out, airbrushed out those domes and lights, and refilmed it.
Made a new master.
Back in the picture.
Yeah, they made a new master. I used to work with film. I understand exactly what you're saying. This is astonishing, and you must have been shocked and then enraged afterward. You had to have been.
Enraged, I don't think is the right word, because we were all so dedicated at getting to the moon and getting back before the Russians did, and they kept compartmentalized so much data and information that we would see something that was out of the ordinary, and I'll tell you of some others in a minute, that it just didn't seem right, but we didn't have time to stop and check because we were pushing to keep up with the schedule. But I ran into Dr. Page that afternoon after I checked the film back in over at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory,
mm-hmm.
and I said, Dr. Page, what happened to the lights and things on the backside of the moon and stuff we found there? He winked at me and he said, there was never anything there.
I would have been furious. I would have been felt betrayed. I would have felt like I had been used, duped, set up, and all kinds of things. You handled it very, very well. I guess you...
Dumbfounded, I think, is probably a better word.
What's that?
I said I was dumbfounded.
That too. But come on,
because
you had seen things on there that, to me, literally changed history as we know it. Period.
Absolutely. And it's been kept secret now on 45 some odd years.
So they've got the master film, and the one that they made a new master. They put the original away for safekeeping. It's been obviously digitized and transferred many times since then. They have a warehouse full of the real deal about off-planet experiences, certainly probes we've sent out there, missions. So again, in this Tsiolkovsky, was it?
Tsiolkovsky's with it.
Tsiolkovsky. All right.
Tsiolkovsky crater.
Now, in that crater, in the dark shadow of the bottom of it, explain again what you saw clearly, please.
Okay, you have to understand the command module is circling the moon, probably not much more than 20 to 50 miles high because of the, and that I don't quote me on, but basically a fairly low orbit.
Understand.
And from there, you've got a pretty good view, and from the film I was looking at, it was pretty easy to see. Tsiolkovsky is not a major, big, huge crater, but it's a substantial medium size. And as I said, the sun angle was such that half of the bottom of the crater was in shadow, and that's where we saw. You can think of a dome, a semi-clear dome over living quarters or over a habitat, so that you had a living environment underneath
mm-hmm.
these domes. We've talked about building those on, the public has talked about building them on Mars as well as on...
Correct. All right, now,
exactly
did the film show enough of these domes to be able to see anything through them? You said there was a light emanating from them. Okay, we got that.
They were glowing, or illuminated from inside, is I guess the best way to say it.
Okay, so there's a power source there, right? Okay.
Right, and then the fact that there was a column of like steam, but it was due to the atmosphere on the moon was becoming diffused pretty quickly. But it was obvious that there was something venting from the central part of these 5 domes.
Were the 5 domes all of the same size? Or did they vary in size? Were they laid out in any particular kind of alignment?
That's an interesting question. I've never really thought of that. I think it'd be better to say that they were positioned based upon the terrain area where they were clustered together.
Okay.
They would probably have been connecting tunnels either just below the lunar surface or from one dome to the other.
Very sophisticated,
they were tightly clustered.
Very advanced, very sophisticated construction, obviously.
Right.
Something very profound going on there. Earth shaking. And when this guy winked at you and said that, you were dumbfounded. At some point, you had to, at that moment in your professional career, realize that the fix was in.
Well, that and, a lot of people have talked about communication back from Apollo 11 on a closed frequency, closed channel.
Mm-hmm.
And we heard a lot of that going on while we were at the Johnson Space Center. But before we could really follow, most of them saying, that was just a ham operator that was hamming it up. And then as the years go by, and so that was the whole thing. Once we finished the moon program, for instance, the Grumman Aerospace Corporation I was with, they laid off 26,000 employees. So if you didn't have the data with you or couldn't keep, that's the other thing. Once we got terminated, the FBI came and confiscated all of our manuals and books and references that we had.
The FBI? The FBI did it.
That's what we were told.
All right.
So I don't have any of the Apollo operations handbooks or the drawings or...
Well, I'm hearing in your voice all I need to hear, and I'm sure the listeners feel the same way. Network, we're going to go right through this break as well. I want to make sure I get as much information from Dr. Johnston as we can this hour. This is very important. All right, so that's the backside of the moon on Apollo 14. Fascinating. You knew at that time that someone else was there. In the years, the decades that have elapsed since then, have you come to any decision as to whether it might have been ours or whose it might have been?
Well, that is a consideration as to whether or not it was one of our prior generations of the 5 cycles that the Mayan calendar and the Mayans and the others have talked about that Earth has gone through. It could well have been, although we might get into a little bit more if we have time. It could well have been the Anunnaki. You want to look at it from that standpoint.
Well, in other words, E.T. Okay. All right.
Correct.
Yeah. And obviously they put them on the backside of the moon to prevent observation from Earth telescopes, to make it a little tougher to see.
And on the front side as well.
Oh, there's okay. Well, we're going there next. All right. Mm-hmm.
The front side, there were several shots from the Russian spacecrafts going to the moon before we did the manned missions, and you can actually see on the rim of the Earth on the side parts of collapsed domes. Now, Mike Barra and Richard Hull have done a lot of research work showing that there is the existence of some of these ancient arcologies, both on the front side and the back side of the moon. Mm-hmm. That there's evidence that at one time it was inhabited. Some of these arcologies have all collapsed, and you can see on the side of one of them where it looks like it's cracked and fallen in half of it. And there's evidence on the front. When you said on the back side, no. If you're going to have a civilization that you're helping bring along and you want to observe them, just like we put mice in a cage, you don't want to have a good observation point. Well, there's a crater on the front side of the moon, just about foresight, almost mid-center of the moon, where you can see the evidence of trusses and supports that would have held a dome at one time. So,
well, the dome motif, obviously, at least at the time of Apollo 14, was still extant and functional, at least on the backside.
And my question that I came up with, was it ET or was it our black projects, black ops?
Well, we have, as Ken, most of our listeners understand the idea of a parallel, much advanced technology which has taken us a far afield in space. So it might well be something along those lines, even though it was in the 1960s. Okay.
Absolutely. And with actually even the Hubble telescope, we tried to get NASA to focus Hubble on the moon.
Fat chance, huh?
And they said, we can't do that. It's too bright. It would damage Hubble.
Oh, yeah, sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
You remember that? And then they turned around and they started photographing, and there's some, in this article on me, there's some pictures of Hubble actually photographing an absolutely perfect shaped pyramid on the surface of the moon. And then as well as, so that they could use Hubble. They could zero in really close and take a look at some of these areas. And the latest thing I just heard is that NASA's trying to declare a no-fly zone on the moon.
Well, they have. It takes effect, I believe, at the end of this month. they've declared a no-fly zone to protect heritage and archaeology of human visitation, something like that. Now, they've released a couple of photographs also, allegedly taken, of the surface of the moon where a couple or three of the Apollo missions landed. Now, the first one was a fairly high-resolution photograph that was released. I'm sure you may have seen it. Maybe you haven't, but it's out there on the net. It was very interesting because the bottom of the lander was still there, which it should be. There were numbers of trails of footprints all around the site, which should be. But there wasn't a single trail from the lunar rover of that mission, and that mission should have had a rover track map all over the place. It didn't.
If it was Apollo 15, 16, and 17, yes, they had rovers.
The last three had rovers. This, I believe it was, I can't remember. I was talking to Jay about this recently. He said, "What don't you see here?" And it might have been 17, but anyway. The second picture that was released, I think it was the second picture a couple of weeks ago, was taken at a much higher, or at least released from a perspective of a much higher altitude, and it was a very low resolution picture, so you could not zoom in on it, and it did not show the detail of the first one. So
they're famous about putting blurry pictures out.
Oh, they are just amazing at it. Yeah.
And any good geek would be able to put in a better bandage over or blacking out area. Some of these, particularly on what we're looking at in the comets and asteroids and meteors right now for tracking. No, you're quite right. If we were unable to get back to our data and find out what was really going on, and then, of course, with the economy and a lot of changes. But I was given directions to destroy all of the photographic data I had except for one set. And as the director of the...
Destroy the originals, Ken?
No, the originals are kept in the photo lab back in bonded locked storage again.
Okay, so you were instructed to destroy the working copies of the originals.
And I had 5 complete sets that I maintained at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. And,
wow.
When Butler Skawa, who was my supervisor, he was directed by, I'll think of his name a little bit later. 45
don't worry
years
about
is
it.
a long time.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
To destroy all of them, and I asked him, I said, well, this is we paid for these with our taxes. A lot of universities would love to have a set of these.
Mm-hmm.
He says, I don't care what you do, just get rid of them. And I kind of took that as a tacit, do what you want to with them. Well, I literally did take 3 sets, dumped them in the Dempsey dumpsters, and I took 1 complete set with my duffel bag. And that evening when I checked out, I threw it in my car and took it home and got the complete set.
And what happened to that complete set?
Well, when I was being honored as a distinguished alumni at Oklahoma City University as a donation gift to the university, I donated that set to them. Mm-hmm. And then that was 1977. In 1995, I believe, is when we had the bomber that blew up the building there in Oklahoma City.
Mm-hmm. The Murrah building.
That was at the same. Right, but that was when I had just met Mr. Hoagland, and he was intrigued because he had put out the word he was trying to find someone who may have had some early generation pictures, because, when you make a copy on a Xerox of a copy, it gets more and more blurry.
Of course.
And here I had first-generation prints off of the first-generation negatives.
Mm-hmm.
And so they put me on a plane, flew me to Oklahoma City immediately, and had me retrieve the film stuff that I had left at the university and brought them back. And what we've used that is as a control. Anytime someone comes up and says, "Oh, well, look here, we've got a Carillion spacecraft landed in such and such crater on the moon," and they'll quote the NASA picture, and well, then get a hold of me. We'll pull my originals that I keep in a safe out and compare, and either, well, there is something strange looking there, or this guy has been smoking something.
So you have the material right now.
I have the material. I keep it under lock and key in a bank vault.
It must be, Ken. It must be that the powers that be want you to still have them, or they would have taken them a long time ago. Correct?
Well, that was something that we were very concerned about whenever I first started coming public a little bit, and that was through Mr. Hoagland.
I mean, they could have threatened you with felony theft of federal property. Who knows? I mean, they could have thrown the book at you if they wanted you to turn that stuff over.
It's supposed to have been public property, but as we all know, NASA is not just a private public
correct
company organization. It's military.
Always has been. Thank you for saying that. I've been telling people that forever. NASA is first and foremost and always military. The public.
That is correct.
The public aspect is PR fluff that they throw at people to make them think that it's basically, folks. It's all smoke and mirrors. It's a lie.
The rank and file that works for NASA still think that it's a public. Most of them do.
They don't get it.
Up.
They really don't get it.
Don't get
wow.
it. Right. Absolutely.
Unreal. That's amazing.
Anyway, the concern that they had was that if I were to keep this stuff quiet, then it would be very easy for them to bump me off and dispose of me, and that would go like this. So the decision was made: go public, tell the truth, get the information. They took me to Washington D.C. I've been in front of the National Press Conference Club.
National Press Club, yeah.
About 4 times now.
Mm-hmm.
And
well, you were in the Disclosure Project, right?
I guess of our own.
Yeah.
But it's kind of, even if I'm that public, it's kind of a little hard to get rid of.
Well, that is absolutely a protocol followed by many people who try to bring some measure of safety to their lives after they've blown the whistle. They go as public, as loud, and as wide, and as far as they can, and I'm always in favor of that. So good for you. Now,
I've just recently started coming out more and more and doing conferences myself instead of just occasionally pop in on some of Mr. Hoagland's conferences.
Well, you are more than capable of masterful presentations. I can tell you that right now. So I'm glad to hear that. You might want to even do
gab.
Well, whatever. But I would suggest doing a documentary at some point. If you haven't thought about it, I'm sure you must have. But this is information and material that does belong to the American people, and in fact, it belongs to the world. It doesn't belong to a small.
The book is in writing. I've got about 175 pages written, and it's called Ken's Moon. Mm-hmm. The smoking gun that revealed NASA's dark mission.
Good.
So
you might consider doing a DVD and including it with the book, Ken.
I have started that too. I've created. Now that's the other thing is I've scanned it at way over 500 dpi and some of even higher of all of the pictures I have.
Good.
And I'll be putting those out too, hopefully.
Very good. Okay, so tell us, we're going to keep going, Network, thanks. Tell us what other things that you saw and what other things you know that have been tampered with, and how much of that went on. How much of a cover-up, and we won't even talk about Mars, but just talk about the moon for right now. Mars is probably 10 times worse from what I understand in terms of artifacts and relics there that they don't want us to see. But what else exists on the moon that you are privy to?
Well, I've got some very excellent pictures that show coming down through the pass on some of the mountain ranges there that look like absolute tracks of like a tracked vehicle. I've been told that that was a boulder that rolled down the mountain, and it's funny because it split off and one went the other way and the other went down.
What's the matter with you, Ken Johnston? Of course it's a boulder. Goodness.
But and I've seen a lot of half tracks and military, being an ex-Marine or former active Marine, I should say.
Yeah.
You know what those tracks should look like.
Sure.
And that did not look like boulders. They're on Apollo 15 in Hadley Riel, the canyon next to Mount Hadley. There's some evidence of some structures or beams that spanned the distance across the ravine or the canyon, whatever you want to call that.
Pretty ambitious building project.
Right, and one of the most famous one is Apollo 17, and that was the not the face, but it looked like a robotic head down in this crater. And they've done a lot of enhancing and looking. You actually can see the iris. It looks just like Data in the Star Trek series type of a head. And the question came up, well, how could they have gotten it back to the Earth? Well, I sat down with, again, Mr. Hoagland and some of the other people there and explained to them when we brought the very first samples back, they were supposed to be quarantined. No one was supposed to touch the boxes once they landed out at Ellington Air Force Base. One of the first pictures was a photo op of Director Webb and the other bigwigs grabbing the boxes and holding them and carrying them. So they knew that they were safe to have.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would say from that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I pointed out to the folks that once the spacecraft had been picked up out of the ocean, was on the aircraft carrier, they took the sample boxes and flew them from there to Hawaii, and then from there flew them back to the States. There were 2 or 3 different stops
mm-hmm.
where the boxes could have been opened, and the secret data, the data that you don't want to get out to the public because we can't handle it. You know, we're not grown up enough to be able to handle the truth.
In other words, what you're suggesting is there weren't just rocks in the boxes. There might have been pieces of advanced technology, relics from the ancient past, who knows, but things that weren't of a normal geological nature.
Or like the head, for instance, they parked the rover on the side such that the camera could not pivot or pan down into the crater where they were,
mm-hmm.
and they were off camera for about 15 minutes.
Is it safe to say that all of the astronauts, virtually all of them, had to be in on this? Had to be, and to this day are sworn to secrecy.
I can't say that for sure, but I have done some research, and I know that each and every one of the lunar mission astronauts were debriefed and by a woman psychologist, and her specialty was in brainwashing, and that's been brought out very strongly in some of the books. I don't know that for a fact, but it's interesting how
mm-hmm.
it affected
mm-hmm.
some of their lives. And,
mm-hmm.
When you're doing something that powerful, you're told, don't worry, you'll be given credit for it at the right time.
Sure.
You just hang in there, you'll be a good little soldier, do your job. And that's kind of the way we all were. And,
well, as far as the astronauts go, all they have to do is tell them, you like your grandchildren, don't you? Real simple.
That sounds like Roswell, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But that's the kind of the way it has gone. And now you're looking at, I was the youngest of all the test pilots there, and one of the youngest ones of the whole bunch. And so many of my cohorts, my friends, and things, I turn 70 next year, and
wow.
You'd be surprised how many of them aren't around anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So they let the secrets die with them, I guess.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of people, like the Roswell witnesses, take the stuff with them, and some don't, but many have, and I really salute you and commend you for standing up and doing the courageous and patriotic thing to do, and that's to tell the truth. That's what Americans are supposed to be known for. Well, you should.
I just thought of it as telling the truth. I didn't think it was being any heroic. It was just, I was very fortunate to be at the right place at the right time, and fortunately, hopefully we'll look back and say I did the right thing.
Well, I can tell you right now you did. And look, who do these people think they are to keep all this secret? Don't we have a birthright, Ken, to know what's really going on around us?
I think if we get into some of the origins of our species from Homo sapien to Homo sapiens, that we may discover a little bit more truths in there, specifically what our rights really are, and just hopefully we've matured to a point that we're allowed to join this club, this intergalactic club, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
My wife friend has a great philosophy that the Earth was a penal colony, and we were quarantined, and they haven't yet let us come off yet.
Well, I don't think we're certainly not rehabilitating very well here, and if we are allowed off the planet, I would suggest that the rate of recidivism would be quite high, and we'd be sent right back here. We're not doing well. We continue to kill each other and develop weapons of more efficient death all the time. All right, let's go back to the moon if you want for a bit, and if you want to discuss anything about Mars, we do have about 10 minutes to go. You've seen, I'm sure, many of the Mars photographs, and having been well familiar with the techniques back then of obscuring things in photographs, and now with everything being digitized, it's really a piece of cake to do. What are your thoughts about Mars, Ken Johnston?
Mars, I think, was a way station, and I think that it was very well inhabited by a intelligent species, and that I've seen so many pictures and evidence of not only structures, but of cities, if you will, same as you would see, like, for instance, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you can see destroyed old cities. I'm not saying that there wasn't a destruction, or you're just talking about over 400,000 years ago that these cities, and I call it a way station, a place of landing on Mars, and at the time, plenty of water, and then be able to go on to whatever planet there is. There's so much going on right now, a convergence of everything, both religious, scientific, astrological, all coming to a head. A lot of it coming up this weekend. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed. And we've got the satellite coming back into Earth. We've got.
Isn't that small potatoes, Ken? Really? I mean, it's 35 feet long, 15 feet wide. It's going to go into the ocean or somewhere. It's little pieces of stuff.
Right. The chances are, to hit one of us would be like 1 in a trillion.
Well,
yeah. The Meter crater over in Arizona, they figured it wasn't any larger than the size of a bus, and that's basically the same size that this satellite.
Would it? You're familiar? Excuse me, I'm sorry, but we don't have a lot of time. I want to make sure I get this question in. You're familiar with Gary McKinnon, the Gary McKinnon story, right?
You'd have to refresh my memory.
He's the British hacker who chopped his way in with a dial-up telephone connection, got into the Pentagon, and went looking for proof of ET, UFOs, and found in the Pentagon a secret file which was entitled, I'm paraphrasing here, United States Navy Non-Terrestrial Craft. And then a subheading in there was, I guess, officers and assignments. He looked as far as he could for the names of these craft to be identified with something in the ocean. There were no ships with those names, none of them. I jump forward. They're trying to extradite Gary. The U.S. has never tried harder to extradite anyone than, as far as I know, they've been after him for almost 10 years now, to bring him over here. And I think if he comes over here, they're going to wring him out like a sponge and he'll be finished. They want to know what he really saw there. Would it surprise you, Dr. Ken Johnston, if we had a parallel, far advanced technology, which included ships in space? They were able and capable of traveling back and forth to Mars in a relatively modest amount of time, certainly to go to the moon at will, and perhaps even other locations in the solar system. Would that surprise you if that were going on?
I would not be surprised in the least. In fact, I have some very close friends that have privately discussed some of that with me, and that I have no reason not to believe them, that we definitely do have a parallel program. And the V2 and U2, I should say, not U2, what's our stealth bomber, is just a public
B2
thing to hide our gravity drive craft that can go back and forth. So I've always looked for, hopefully they'll give me the keys to one sometime and I'll get a chance to go look.
Well, I think you deserve to be shown one. Of course, maybe with your coming forward that disqualifies you, but you certainly do deserve it. This idea of anti-gravity or minimizing gravity, the technology is quite clearly something that is there. It is beyond top secret. There is the TR3B triangle, which we first talked about on this program, with Ed Fouché. It must be 12, 14 years ago now, something like that. There are a lot of things flying around and landing on this planet. Some of them are probably ours, but not all of them. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. And I have talked to an airman who was part of a recovery team over off the east coast of Africa. And when I showed him I had evidence of that, he was trembling and shaking a bit, because he was told if he even discussed it that he would, his family would be killed. So the truth is out there.
The truth is out here. It's right. Actually, we literally know pretty much what's going on within a reasonable, plus or minus 25, 30%. We've got a pretty good guess, I think, those of us who really study this. You've got sources I'll never have. You know an awful lot. This issue of the cover-up, how much longer do you think we can be insulted with it? And how many more people, like the gentleman you just mentioned, will be in service to these morons who keep all of this secret, to themselves and threaten to kill people and their families if they talk about it. When's this going to end?
I think we are at the point of disclosure, and the information is coming out so fast that they cannot keep a lid on it any longer. And I truly believe within the next 6 months that we're going to have virtually total disclosure. I mean, I can't see it going any longer. The time is now.
The time is now, indeed. Unfortunately, they show no signs of really loosening things up. However, I might point out that the obvious chatter in the background of what was predicted by Wernher von Braun, that the ultimate trump card would be the fake ET threat to the planet and the invasion, the illegal invasion, to keep the sheep firmly in line. Do you see that scenario as a possibility soon, that they might fake an ET invasion of some kind? They've got the technology to do it. We know that.
Absolutely, we know they do. And I think that has been a plan, but I think it's reached a point that it's almost beyond their ability to be able to pull that off. There's, with the worldwide communication networks and things that we have, unless we get an infrared shock from one of these incoming celestial objects, it wipes out our whole communication network. I don't see them being able to pull it off.
Okay.
Hope not.
Yeah. Of all the pictures of objects on Mars, certainly some of the most intriguing are the what look like glass tubes. Those are fascinating, among other things.
Yeah. Underground transport system.
Transport, or they're actually quite wide, and they could be waterways. They could be all kinds of things. We don't know. Would it surprise you if Mars was still inhabited? Now, I'm not talking about humans being there inhabiting it, which is in my opinion, not only probable but almost for sure, but other types of beings as well, still living there.
No, I think there's a great old book called all about Mars. Anyway, that it talks about the actual indigenous versions, as well as you have ET on Mars. I think it wouldn't surprise me a bit. To think that we are the only sentient beings in the universe is stupid.
It's obscenely stupid. It is so myopic. It is so backwards. It's embarrassing. I mean, when I hear people talk like that, I just shake my head, and then when you look at the average American now, a younger person under the age of 35, 40 even, who are so consumed with television, escapism, celebrity, they're certainly being beaten down with debt and fear all the time. The sheep are pretty well cowed. They keep their heads down. They do pretty much what they're told. So that great spirit of the 60s and even into the 70s of individual achievement, of reaching for the stars, when they scrapped the Saturn rocket program, even going to the extent of apparently destroying the blueprints of the Saturn booster, Saturn V.
They did that. Absolutely, they did that.
That tells us a lot. They're talking about bringing the ISS down now in a destructive dive no later than 2020. We no longer have a shuttle program. Of course, that has been, in my opinion, and I think yours as well, just a public relations a parallel activity to keep people thinking that this was all there was. It's not true. So the shuttle program really outlived its usefulness from before it was begun. I remember the debate in the beginning of, shall we build this hybrid shuttle or build a space plane? Well, the shuttle won out, and that's what we got stuck with. If things are disclosed in the next 6 months to a year, what is that going to do to you're a veteran NASA team player. What will that do for our space conquests so far? And I think there have been many of them. Will they bring those forward too, or will they just grudgingly admit that we're not alone as an opener, and then slowly over a long period of time begin to unravel the truth about what they've done?
I would say with the technology that has been massed behind our backs, that if we do have a pretty much collapse of our economy, our society as we know it, they're almost going to have to bring forward technology to get a restart of what we are and who we are, what's going on. So
Good point.
I really expect that's going to be the theme. Whether or not everything comes forward, I doubt that.
Yeah.
Certainly enough. 0 point energy, power. All of these things will have to be done.
Ken, thank you very, very much for being here. And please, when your book is finished or close to being finished, or if you'd like to come back, just email me. I would love to talk to you again. Bring up a list of things, and we'll do it. You've made a lot of friends tonight, and I'm greatly indebted to you for being here. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeff. It's been my pleasure. I look forward to it.
Okay. Good night.
Good night.
All right. And thanks to Jay Widener for helping set this up as well. Okay, there you go. Lots to think about.
Proper journalism and research
right,
things,
right.
I think all the public would be well informed. As far as being in charge of all of the photographic data generated, this was at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. All of the pictures that were taken during the missions to the moon, those that also went around the moon, it didn't land Apollo 10 and, of course, Apollo 13.
Okay, we're talking, excuse me, Ken, we're talking about all of the pictures taken en route to the moon, orbiting the moon, landing on the moon, leaving the moon, all of it went through your hands.
In addition, all of the photographic data that was generated at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory as the various scientists would come in from around the world and process some of the moon rocks, and then they would write up their particular reports as to what was found on the moon. And that kind of brings up an interesting story, Jeff. I was on a flight and talking with a person sitting next to me. We're talking a little bit about the Apollo program and the moon rocks, and this gentleman across the aisle, he says, could I interview you? I'm with the Arizona Herald. And the reason I bring that up is that in the conversation we talked about some of the elements that
Okay, let's go. This is going to be a fascinating hour, and I'm truly honored to have this gentleman as a guest, and I hope all of you will learn, as I'm looking forward to doing, new things about very interesting subjects. Let me just leave. And a PhD in metaphysics. In 2001, NASA and JPL selected Dr. Ken Johnston to represent them in New Mexico as one of their solar system ambassadors. Ken is no longer with NASA or JPL, but continues to give lectures throughout the United States. To wrap up an amazing career, Ken has now come forward to disclose what was really found on the backside of the moon. He's retired now, raises miniature horses and donkeys in New Mexico, has a big family to have fun with, and really, I hope, is enjoying life. Another man who has served this country brilliantly. Ken, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you, Jeff. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thank you, sir. There was a recent story, and one of the reasons you're on, most specifically, had to do with a story that, well, you had some issues with it. Let's put it that way. It was all over the internet about the second week of September. NASA whistleblower, alien moon cities exist, and I saw the story back then, and it went on and on, round and round, and pretty fanciful things in it, but I thought I'd invite you on, and thanks to Jay Widener for setting this up. And I guess we could kind of start wherever you'd like, but I certainly do want to spend some time on the issue of your being in charge of and responsible for controlling all of the data and photographic information generated from the lunar missions. This is key information. All right, where would you like to start?
Well, I don't know. I guess we could start about in the beginning, particularly with this article where they were saying that I came out and said that there were alien cities, etc. A lot of that information was published by Richard C. Hoagland and Mike Barra in their book, Dark Mission. And, it's kind of interesting how the news, if you've been following it, which we all can't help from following it,
right?
They have a tendency to kind of get a little tidbit, and then they start spinning it the way they want to see it.
Oh, they grow it into a mountain, some of them. They take a little it's amazing what they do. It's far beyond spin. I mean, they almost create an entire fiction.
That's where my eyes up. And there's so much real truth and information out there that if they just stick to the basics and do...
Leave it at that while I do the introduction here. The guest, of course, is, if you've looked at guests at Rense.com, Dr. Ken Johnston. Ken learned to fly in the U.S. Marine Corps, and in the 1960s, Ken was one of the 5 test pilots assigned to work with the astronauts during the Apollo Moon program at NASA in Houston. His job back then was to help train the astronauts to fly the lunar module. He was one of the test conductors and became the test director of the TM-5 lunar module spacecraft that was used to train all moon landing Apollo astronauts. All of them. In 1969, Ken was responsible for controlling all of the data and photographic... Let me do that again. I want to hit the word all. In 1969, Ken was responsible for controlling all of the data and photographic information generated from the lunar missions. All of the data and photographic information. Okay? Ken has 3 Bachelor's of Science degrees in aviation and aerospace engineering. He has a doctorate in divinity.